The fall of a technocrat, sentencing of former DR Congo, Prime Minister sparks controversy and reflection across Africa. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we unpack Africa's biggest headlines with truth, context, and fearless analysis. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we shine the spotlight on Democratic Republic of Congo, where a former prime minister has just been sentenced to 10 years of hard labor for one of the largest corruption scandals in the nation's history. But is this real justice or selective prosecution? And what does it mean for Africa's future? We go beyond the courtroom to expose a deeper story of broken systems, abandoned mega projects, and the fight for a new model of governance across the continent. In a landmark decision that has sent ripples through the political and judicial landscapes of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, former Prime Minister Augustin Matata Ponyo has been sentenced to 10 years of hard labor for the embezzlement of $245 million in public funds. Alongside him, Deogratias Mutombo, the former governor of the Central Bank of Congo, received a 5-year sentence. Both men were convicted in relation to the Bukanga-Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park, a flagship agricultural project meant to tackle chronic food insecurity in the DRC. The ruling, issued by the DRC Constitutional Court, has sparked both applause and outrage, highlighting the tension between the demand for accountability and the risks of politicized justice. Background: the rise and fall of Matata Ponyo. Matata Ponyo's political journey is significant. Serving as finance minister 2010-2012 and then as prime minister 2012-2016 under former President Joseph Kabila, Ponyo earned accolades for his economic stewardship. His tenure was marked by relative macroeconomic stability, winning him praise from international institutions, including the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which noted improvements in inflation control and public finance management, IMF 2012. However, the seeds of his downfall were planted in 2014 when his government championed the Bukanga-Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park, touted as a game changer for food production and employment. The $285 million project, built with South African technical support, was meant to produce maize, poultry, and processed foods for the domestic market. But by 2017, the project had collapsed, with abandoned machinery and ghost structures in its place. By 2020, the Inspectorate General of Finance, IGF, uncovered staggering financial irregularities, prompting a 4-year-long investigation. Legal process and political undercurrents. The recent verdict has been heavily criticized by Ponyo's legal team and political allies. His lawyer denounced the ruling as unfair and politically motivated, asserting that the court bypassed due process and disregarded evidence that exonerated him. Ponyo, now the leader of the Leadership and Governance for Development (LGD) party, has increasingly positioned himself as an opposition figure, raising concerns that the case may be a pretext to eliminate political rivals ahead of future elections. The DRC's judiciary has long been under scrutiny for its vulnerability to executive influence. Critics argue that while anti-corruption drives are essential, they risk becoming tools for selective justice. This sentiment was echoed by several Congolese civil society organizations who, while supporting accountability, warned against weaponizing the law to settle political scores. RFI Afrique, 2024. African context: corruption and the politics of accountability. Across Africa, the conviction of high-ranking officials like Ponyo presents a complex picture. On one hand, it reflects a growing trend of judicial assertiveness in tackling elite impunity. On the other, it raises the question: are these prosecutions genuine steps toward good governance or veiled political purges? For example, in South Africa, former President Jacob Zuma was jailed in 2021 for contempt of court over corruption-related inquiries. The move was hailed as a breakthrough for the rule of law, though his supporters labeled it a political witch hunt. In Nigeria, numerous former governors, including James Ibori and Joshua Daria, were convicted for corruption. Yet, selective enforcement and plea deals often undermine public confidence in the judiciary. In Kenya, President William Ruto's government has taken steps to audit mega projects from the Uhuru Kenyatta era, stirring fears of retributive justice rather than institutional reform. The DRC case fits squarely into this continental trend. While anti corruption rhetoric gains political capital, the lack of systemic reform, including independent auditing agencies, strong whistleblower protections, and prosecutorial independence, often results in politically convenient enforcement rather than true institutional change. Economic ramifications when development fails. The collapse of the Bukanga-Lonzo project is more than a corruption scandal. It is a symbol of Africa's struggle with mismanaged megaprojects. The DRC government's own audit revealed that more than 70% of the project budget was misappropriated or unaccounted for. IGF Report 2020. The failure meant not just lost billions, but also missed opportunities to address food insecurity, reduce import dependence, and create rural employment. Agricultural megaprojects have often struggled across Africa due to corruption, poor planning, and lack of local integration. In Mozambique, the Pro Savannah project with Brazil and Japan faltered amid land rights controversies. In Ghana, multiple irrigation schemes have been abandoned after initial political fanfare. In DR Congo, where 75% of the population lives in poverty and nearly 26 million people face food insecurity, WFP 2024, the failed promise of Bukanga-Lonzo is particularly bitter. What is needed is not just the prosecution of alleged thieves, but a paradigm shift in project planning, execution, and monitoring. Forward-looking approach, justice, but with reform. As the DRC moves forward, several key steps are necessary. 1. Reform judicial independence. The judiciary must be insulated from political interference. Establishing a judicial service commission and empowering the Supreme Council of the Judiciary to oversee appointments and disciplinary matters is critical. 2. Strengthen oversight institutions. The IGF has shown potential. Its independence and capacity must be scaled up to become a permanent pillar of public finance oversight. 3. Public transparency of trials. Publishing court proceedings, audit trails, and verdicts will reduce conspiracy theories and rebuild public trust. 4. Recovery of stolen assets. The government must collaborate with international agencies to trace and repatriate embezzled funds, investing them transparently in agriculture and public services. 5. Empower local farming. Instead of mega projects prone to elite capture, focus on supporting local cooperatives, smallholder farmers, and regional food markets through access to credit, extension services, and climate-resilient seeds. Political fallout. What the Matata Ponyo case reveals about DR Congo's power dynamics. The conviction of Matata Ponyo is reverberating not just in the courtrooms, but in the corridors of political power. Analysts view this ruling as a strategic blow to emerging opposition figures ahead of the 2025 general elections, in which President Felix Tshisekedi is expected to seek another term. Ponyo, as the head of the Leadership and Governance for Development (LGD) party, had been positioning himself as a reform-minded candidate, appealing to both international observers and Congolese technocrats disillusioned by the current administration's governance failures. Although President Tshisekedi has pledged to fight corruption since taking office in 2019, critics accuse his government of selectively prosecuting political opponents while shielding allies. Recent allegations against Presidential Chief of Staff Vital Kamerhe, who was once convicted for embezzling nearly $50 million and later acquitted on appeal, only add fuel to this narrative. In contrast, Ponyo's conviction is perceived by many as justice without fairness, reinforcing the belief that anti-corruption campaigns in Africa often serve dual purposes: governance and political control. This power play risks further polarizing the political climate ahead of the elections, especially in a country with a fragile post conflict democratic setup and a long history of disputed polls. Already, the LGD party has rejected the verdict, calling for international mediation and pledging to challenge the ruling at the African Court on Human and People's Rights, a move that could escalate diplomatic tensions if perceived as interference in domestic judicial matters. Technocratic leaders under siege, a continental trend? The Ponyo case also reignites a deeper debate about the fate of technocratic leaders in Africa, those trained in economics, public policy, and international development who seek to bring data-driven solutions into deeply politicized environments. While they often earn early praise from global institutions like the World Bank and IMF, they are frequently scapegoated when large-scale reforms falter or when political winds shift. Across the continent, Rwanda's former finance minister Donald Kaberuka, though internationally respected for transforming Rwanda's fiscal landscape, had to navigate persistent internal political rivalries. In Ethiopia, technocrats within Abiy Ahmed's administration have been sidelined amid growing centralization of power. Kenya's technocrats, including former Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, have been ensnared in controversial prosecutions tied to major infrastructure contracts, with critics alleging political targeting. In many African states, technocrats operate in systems where political survival often outweighs long-term policy success. The disincentives to speak truth to power are immense, and reformers risk being branded as traitors when political fortunes shift. The consequence is a chilling effect on public service innovation and institutional reform. The Ponyo trial, whether just or not, thus becomes a cautionary tale for Africa's rising policy thinkers. Without political insulation, technocratic leadership is both fragile and expendable. Media, civil society, and the role of public opinion. One of the more hopeful trends emerging from the DRC case is the increasing role of civil society and independent media in shaping public discourse. Despite challenges of press freedom and limited access to information, Congolese journalists and watchdog organizations have followed the trial closely, scrutinizing court documents and amplifying voices that question the fairness of the process. Organizations such as Lutte pour le Changement, and Congolese League Against Corruption, LICOCO, have demanded full transparency in the prosecution and disbursement of the recovered assets. They argue that corruption trials must not stop at conviction. They must demonstrate a clear path to restitution and institutional reform. Similarly, independent outlets such as Actualite.cd and Radio Okapi have opened up platforms for citizen voices, who are increasingly asking not just who stole, but what will be done to fix the broken system. This renewed civic engagement is essential in a country where institutional trust remains low. A 2023 Afrobarometer survey showed that only 38% of Congolese citizens trust the judiciary, while trust in political parties is even lower at 29%. Afrobarometer 2023. If well managed, public discourse around the Ponyo case could create pressure for judicial reforms and better governance practices, pushing the state toward a more accountable and citizen-centered path. Implications for foreign investment and international partnerships. The international community has also been watching the proceedings with growing concern. Foreign investors, particularly in agriculture and infrastructure sectors, have long complained about policy uncertainty, weak legal enforcement, and political risk in the DRC. The failure of the Bukanga-Lonzo project is likely to reinforce these fears, especially for multilateral development institutions and private investors seeking to back agro-industrial projects in fragile states. The case also places pressure on bilateral and multilateral donors. Institutions like the World Bank, African Development Bank, and EU Commission, which have supported various transparency and governance reforms in the DRC, now face questions about how aid money is tracked and evaluated post disbursement. It may prompt calls for more conditionality tied to measurable anti corruption benchmarks, stronger independent audits, and greater civil society involvement in project implementation and oversight. At the same time, the conviction of high profile figures could serve as a double edged sword, a deterrent for future wrongdoing, or a red flag for politically exposed individuals being used as scapegoats. For development finance institutions, the challenge will be to distinguish between legitimate law enforcement and politicized prosecution, ensuring their engagement supports long term institutional strengthening rather than short term political objectives. Post conviction reality: what happens to Bukanga-Lonzo now? With the sentencing of Augustin Matata Ponyo and Deogratias Mutombo, public attention is rapidly shifting to the future of the Bukanga-Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park itself. Once envisioned as a beacon of food self-sufficiency and rural transformation, the site now stands as a haunting symbol of ambition derailed by corruption. But the land, estimated to span over 80,000 hectares of fertile terrain, remains a potentially transformative asset if reclaimed with transparency, planning, and public participation. The DRC government has not yet laid out a clear post conviction recovery strategy for Bukanga-Lonzo. Civil society actors and local farmer unions are demanding a complete reassessment of the site, including environmental audits, reallocation of usable land to local agricultural cooperatives, and a transparent review of all remaining infrastructure. Some have proposed transforming it into a state run agricultural training hub, while others call for community based farming zones with subsidies and extension services to support smallholder farmers. However, concerns remain that the land could once again fall prey to elite capture. Local reports suggest that connected business persons and politicians are lobbying for new concession agreements, raising alarms over a potential repeat of the original scandal. Without institutional safeguards, history may simply repeat itself under a different administration. The regional impact: a mirror for fragile states. The DRC's Bukanga-Lonzo debacle also mirrors broader challenges across fragile and resource-rich African states, where large-scale land development projects often fall victim to corruption, poor planning, or elite manipulation. Several regional parallels offer critical insights. In South Sudan, the promise of agricultural transformation post-independence was dashed by elite-driven land grabs and crony contracting, leaving millions dependent on food aid despite vast arable land. Angola's Kapanda Agro-Industrial Complex, launched with grand vision in the 2000s, similarly deteriorated due to opaque financing and lack of institutional oversight. Zimbabwe's Command Agriculture Program, though successful in some areas, faced serious allegations of fund diversion and political favoritism. What these cases illustrate is that mega agriculture projects in Africa often bypass community input, environmental safeguards, and fiscal accountability. Moreover, their failures are rarely studied systematically, leading to recycled mistakes instead of evidence-based reform. The DRC could seize this moment to break that cycle. By opening Bukanga-Lonzo's post-conviction future to public consultations, expert reviews, and international best practices, it could set a precedent for transforming failed projects into learning and development opportunities, not just for Congo, but for the continent. The political stakes: 2025 elections and the battle for reform. The shadow of this case will undoubtedly loom large over the 2025 general elections, especially if Matata Ponyo continues to push back against the ruling and mobilize political support. With his LGD party already amplifying claims of judicial persecution, the trial risks becoming a rallying cry for opposition forces accusing the Tshisekedi administration of undermining democracy and weaponizing justice. President Tshisekedi, for his part, faces a delicate balancing act. While his anti-corruption rhetoric remains popular, especially with urban voters and donors, the perception of selective justice could erode his credibility and alienate segments of the elite. Much will depend on whether the administration can demonstrate that its pursuit of accountability extends beyond political opponents to include allies and insiders implicated in ongoing scandals. The Electoral Commission, CENI, and the Constitutional Court, already under scrutiny for alleged executive influence, will also come under increasing pressure to demonstrate impartiality. If public trust in democratic institutions is further eroded, it could fuel unrest, especially in restive provinces such as Kasai, Ituri, and North Kivu, where political tensions and armed violence already intersect. Moreover, the outcome of this case could influence voter sentiment among Congo's urban middle class and diaspora communities, who are increasingly vocal about the need for genuine reform, transparency, and respect for the rule of law. The risk is that, if perceived as a political vendetta rather than a reform milestone, this case may deepen cynicism and disillusionment among critical voting blocs. Regional diplomacy and AU silence. A notable dimension of the Matata Ponyo conviction has been the relative silence of regional and continental bodies, particularly the African Union, AU, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC. Despite the seriousness of the allegations, the political profile of the accused, and potential implications for judicial independence, both institutions have refrained from making public comments or launching observer inquiries. This silence speaks volumes about the AU's ongoing struggle to balance non-interference with democratic norms enforcement. While AU instruments like the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, ACDEG, explicitly encourage member states to promote rule of law and prevent politically motivated trials, actual implementation remains weak. Similarly, SADC's electoral and governance units, once instrumental in mediating crises in Zimbabwe and Lesotho, have remained passive. This raises broader questions about whether regional institutions are adequately equipped or willing to engage in preventive diplomacy when governance crises are still at the institutional level rather than descending into open conflict. Civil society organizations across Africa have urged the AU to play a proactive role in setting judicial independence benchmarks, organizing peer reviews of high-profile corruption cases, and strengthening legal cooperation for transnational asset recovery. The Matata Ponyo case presents a perfect entry point, but only if there is political will to act. Tracking the money. Where did the $245 million go? A central question that remains unanswered, and one that could shape the future of financial transparency in the Democratic Republic of Congo and beyond, is: where exactly did the $245 million meant for Bukanga-Lonzo end up? The Inspectorate General of Finance, IGF, in its 2020 report, outlined a tangled web of shell companies, phantom contractors, and suspicious wire transfers. Much of the money, it revealed, was dispersed to intermediaries with little to no track record in agriculture or infrastructure. In some cases, contracts were issued without competitive bidding, and payments were made before any work was completed or verified. The financial trail appears to cross multiple jurisdictions, with funds allegedly funneled into foreign bank accounts in South Africa, the UAE, and Europe under the guise of procurement and logistics. Yet, despite the gravity of these findings, very few funds have been recovered. Experts attribute this to a lack of interagency coordination, weak asset tracing capacity, and ineffective international cooperation. The DRC is not alone in this challenge. Across Africa, stolen public funds often disappear into complex global financial systems that shield illicit wealth through layers of offshore accounts, trusts, and nominee directors. The Africa Growth Initiative at Brookings estimates that the continent loses over $88 billion annually to illicit financial flows, IFFs, an amount that dwarfs the combined total of all development aid received by African countries each year, UNCTAD 2020. In the case of Bukanga-Lonzo, no comprehensive forensic audit has been made public, and the prosecution's case relied heavily on the IGF's initial findings without an international trace of the embezzled assets. If Congo is serious about recovering the stolen funds, it will require 1. Enhanced cross-border cooperation through mutual legal assistance treaties, MLATs. 2. Engagement with Interpol and financial intelligence units across affected jurisdictions. 3. Deployment of advanced data analytics and forensic accounting tools. And 4. Independent international asset recovery experts to audit, trace, and recommend restitution mechanisms. Until such measures are adopted, accountability will remain performative rather than transformative. The untouched role of international partners and development agencies. Another dimension that has been disturbingly underexplored in the Bukanga-Lonzo scandal is the complicity or complacency of international development partners. The Agro-Industrial Park was launched with technical support from South African entities and was reportedly on the radar of several multilateral institutions, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank, which had engaged in adjacent agricultural infrastructure projects at the time. While these agencies did not directly finance Bukanga-Lonzo, their silence and detachment raise critical questions. Were there early warning signs that were ignored? Did development partners apply rigorous fiduciary risk assessments when engaging with DR Congo's broader agricultural strategy? Should multilateral institutions establish more robust safeguards and political risk indicators in fragile states? The Bukanga-Lonzo case reinforces the need for corruption-sensitive development finance. Donor organizations and investors must not only consider technical feasibility, but also the integrity and accountability of project leadership. When large sums flow into weak institutions without sufficient checks, the risk of capture becomes almost inevitable. Public trust and the future of anti-corruption in Africa. As the dust settles around Matata Ponyo's conviction, the larger concern across the continent remains: how to build enduring anti-corruption frameworks that are institutionally strong, legally sound, and politically neutral. The reality is that many African anti-corruption bodies are underfunded, understaffed, and over-politicized, while some, like Rwanda's Office of the Ombudsman, Botswana's DCEC, or Ghana's CRAJ, have managed pockets of success. Others operate more like executive appendages, targeting opposition figures while shielding ruling party elites. To break this cycle, African states must embrace 5 foundational reforms. 1. Constitutional protection of anti-corruption agencies, ensuring legal independence and financial autonomy. 2. Transparent appointments, with civil society and parliamentary oversight. 3. Whistleblower legislation, with guarantees of safety, anonymity, and legal support. 4. Public asset declarations, for all senior officials, with real-time verification. 5. Digitization of government services to reduce face-to-face corruption opportunities. Such reforms cannot be imposed externally. They must be driven by domestic demand for change, particularly from youth-led civic movements and reformist media voices. The power of platforms like Chakra-Fees, Mustfall, NSARS, and Lucha in shaping narratives and applying pressure shows that citizen agency is central to lasting change. Cultural reflections, the ethics of leadership, and the loss of public morality. Perhaps one of the most corrosive effects of corruption in Africa is not just financial, it is moral. The Bukanga-Lonzo saga, like many others, underscores a deeper crisis of ethical leadership, where public office is viewed not as a trust, but as a means of accumulation. From Sierra Leone to Zimbabwe, from Cameroon to Guinea-Bissau, many youth now grow up witnessing political elites live in opulence while basic services collapse. Over time, this breeds a culture of cynicism where everyone steals and corruption becomes normalized as a survival strategy rather than condemned as a civic betrayal. As African societies wrestle with this moral erosion, there must be a conscious investment in civic education, ethical leadership training, and cultural storytelling that revives traditional values of community accountability and moral uprightness. Churches, mosques, traditional leaders, and schools all have roles to play in reshaping public consciousness. The ghost of Bukanga-Lonzo. Can Congo use this moment to forge a new model for agro-industrial development? While the ruins of Bukanga-Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park remain a stark reminder of misgovernance, they also offer an opportunity, a chance to reimagine and rebuild a new model of inclusive, accountable agricultural development, not only for the DRC, but for the entire African continent. The questions before policymakers are urgent. Can Congo turn failure into reform? Can it convert scandal into strategy? In recent years, several African nations have embarked on more inclusive agro-industrial models with varying degrees of success. These examples provide lessons that could guide Congo's next steps. Ethiopia's integrated agro-industrial parks, IAIPs, have been developed with local government partnerships, private sector involvement, and environmental considerations. While implementation has faced bureaucratic delays, the parks represent a more sustainable vision of localized agro-processing, employment generation, and rural industrialization. In Senegal, the Agropoli Sud project focuses on cassava and fruit processing with strong involvement from local farmers' cooperatives, reducing dependence on government middlemen and building local trust. Through strategic partnerships with smallholders and consistent technical support, the project has achieved notable results in increasing local value addition. Nigeria, through its special agro-industrial processing zones, SAPZs, backed by the African Development Bank, AFDB, has begun transitioning from centrally managed megaprojects to regional development hubs. These zones encourage cluster-based farming, linking production to processing and markets, while promoting public-private partnerships and shared infrastructure models. What distinguishes these more promising cases from Bukanga-Lonzo is not just better project design, it is multi-stakeholder governance, land use transparency, robust project monitoring, and a deliberate effort to integrate local farmers, not sideline them. For the DRC to adopt such a model, it must first conduct a full forensic evaluation of Bukanga-Lonzo, not just the corruption, but also the technical flaws in design, the exclusion of local expertise, and the unrealistic revenue projections that inflated expectations. Then, it must craft a national agro-industrial recovery blueprint that includes farmer-led governance boards to co-manage projects with regional authorities, land tenure security reforms, preventing elite land grabs, and empowering women and youth farmers, capacity building programs to train a new generation of agri-entrepreneurs and engineers, technology transfer frameworks to ensure projects use appropriate, maintainable, and climate-resilient innovations, climate-smart agriculture standards embedded into the design of all new agro-industrial ventures. Such reforms will not be easy, nor will they be politically neutral. But in a post-Bukanga-Lonzo Congo, failure to reform is not an option. It is an invitation to repeat the cycle. youth voices, digital media, and the rise of agro-justice advocacy, a new and powerful force is shaping the post-scandal narrative in the DRC. Digital-savvy youth activists who are using social media, mobile journalism, and open data platforms to demand agro-justice, a term now emerging in Congolese civil discourse to describe justice in land use, agricultural policy, and food systems governance. Activist groups such as Vérité Agraire, Jeunes pour la Transparence Rurale, and Agro-Congo Watch are leveraging platforms like Twitter X, WhatsApp groups, and Facebook Live to expose land fraud, track failed projects, and share alternative proposals for agricultural revitalization. Their online campaigns have triggered local town hall meetings, press debates, and parliamentary questions. In one viral video, a group of university students from Kisangani used drone footage to showcase the decayed state of Bukanga-Lonzo, juxtaposing it with interviews from local farmers who were never consulted but now demand to be part of any future redevelopment. The video sparked a national debate, eventually prompting the Ministry of Agriculture to promise consultations before any decision is made on the park's future. This is a new era where governance is no longer defined by ministerial memos, but by citizen surveillance and digital storytelling. It's a space where hashtags challenge headlines, and the youth are not just demanding a seat at the table, they are building new tables altogether. If harnessed effectively, this civic energy could become the cornerstone of a grassroots-driven agricultural policy movement that prioritizes dignity, food sovereignty, and intergenerational equity. Legal lessons, redefining responsibility beyond conviction. Even as Ponyo and Mutombo face prison terms, legal scholars argue that true accountability must extend beyond individual conviction to the systemic structures that enabled the fraud. In other words, who else signed off on contracts? Who failed to detect anomalies? Who benefited from the collapse in silence? The Bukanga-Lonzo case has thus revealed a critical weakness in public procurement law and oversight. Contracts were awarded without transparency, project implementation bypassed the National Assembly, and reporting mechanisms were deliberately weakened. Until these loopholes are closed, Congo's anti-corruption drive will remain reactive, not preventive. Several legal reform proposals are now circulating within civil society and academia, including the creation of a parliamentary oversight committee on strategic public projects with biannual reporting requirements, a real-time digital procurement tracking platform open to public scrutiny, an agricultural projects accountability law, which would mandate social impact assessments and public vetting before launch, reinforcement of the Court of Auditors, granting it prosecutorial referral powers and budget autonomy. Legal accountability must also include corporate entities. Any private company found complicit in fraud must be subject to asset seizure, blacklisting from future public tenders, and legal action, something Congo has historically shied away from in the name of foreign investment protection. This will require courage, but without it, impunity will find new hosts, and justice will only punish the visible, not the powerful. The political economy of grand projects in Africa. Are mega projects doomed, or can they be redeemed? The failure of the Bukanga-Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park is not an isolated event. It is part of a broader pattern seen across Africa, where ambitious mega projects, often launched with much fanfare, collapse under the weight of corruption, mismanagement, and politicization. These projects, typically portrayed as national symbols of progress and modernization, often end up as abandoned monuments to elite-driven development disconnected from local realities. Scholars of African political economy have long pointed to the paradox of development without development, where state-led projects consume vast resources yet deliver minimal lasting impact. Grand infrastructure schemes, industrial parks, smart cities, and agro-industrial hubs are often announced during election cycles to signal leadership vision and attract donor funding, but are rarely subjected to rigorous planning or long term maintenance frameworks. Several examples highlight this phenomenon. Kenya's Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme, launched to ensure food security through maize farming, was abandoned after millions of dollars were misused. Investigations revealed procurement irregularities and ghost deliveries. Angola's Kalamba New City, a multi-billion-dollar housing project built by Chinese contractors, was touted as a solution to Luanda's housing crisis. Yet years later, the apartments remained mostly unoccupied, priced far beyond the reach of the average Angolan. Ghana's Seglemi housing project, intended to deliver 5,000 affordable homes, was halted amid allegations of inflated contracts and incomplete works. Despite 90% of funds being disbursed, less than a quarter of the planned units were constructed. What these cases demonstrate is a recurring political logic: the mega project as a tool of elite legitimacy, not necessarily a vehicle for inclusive growth. The decision making processes are top down, funding sources are opaque, and accountability is often deferred or diverted through legal and political loopholes. For mega projects to succeed in Africa, a shift must occur from leader centric development to citizen informed design, where communities are not passive recipients, but active co creators of project vision, oversight, and benefit sharing. Financing fragility, the role of debt and international contractors. Another core factor behind the failure of many African mega projects, including Bukanga-Lonzo, is the financing model. Governments, often cash-strapped and desperate for quick results, enter into large, often opaque loan agreements with foreign contractors or financiers. In the absence of robust due diligence, these loans become instruments of dependency and risk rather than development and empowerment. The Bukanga-Lonzo project, although domestically funded, followed a similar trajectory: a rapid infusion of public funds dispersed with limited scrutiny, heavily reliant on foreign technical partners, and ultimately shielded from domestic accountability mechanisms. Across the continent, Chinese, Turkish, Brazilian, and Gulf-based contractors have been major players in mega projects, offering turnkey solutions that include financing, design, and implementation. While some have delivered critical infrastructure, others have been linked to corruption, cost inflation, and disregard for local environmental and social norms. This raises serious questions. Should African governments impose stricter conditions on foreign-led megaprojects? Can domestic contractors and engineers be empowered to take the lead? Are there regional mechanisms, perhaps through the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, to promote intra-African construction and design expertise? A new financing framework is urgently needed, one that prioritizes transparency, long-term cost-benefit analysis, and inclusive procurement practices. African development banks and sovereign wealth funds must play a more prominent role, ensuring that mega projects serve public interest rather than private enrichment. Gender and land justice, the missing voices in the Bukanga-Lonzo conversation. One of the most glaring omissions in the Bukanga-Lonzo scandal and its aftermath is the absence of gender-focused analysis. Women in the DRC, as in much of Africa, play a dominant role in agriculture, accounting for over 60% of the workforce in the sector. Yet, they remain systematically excluded from land ownership, agricultural finance, policymaking, and benefit sharing in large agricultural initiatives. At Bukanga-Lonzo, there was no gender impact assessment, no consultation with women's cooperatives, and no inclusion of female voices in project governance. This mirrors broader trends where land rights are allocated to political elites, corporate entities, or male-dominated farmer unions, while women remain invisible in formal documentation, but disproportionately affected by displacement or loss of livelihood. In post-crisis planning, Any attempt to reclaim and rehabilitate the site must center gender-responsive development frameworks, including secure land tenure for women with legal recognition and title ownership, access to inputs, credit, and training tailored to the needs of women farmers, inclusion of women in governance bodies for any revived or reimagined agricultural zones, data collection and reporting disaggregated by gender to inform targeted policies and measure impact. Justice cannot be partial. It must be intersectional, recognizing how power, gender, and class intersect to marginalize specific groups, even in the name of national development. Cultural memory and the role of art in preserving truth. In the DRC, as elsewhere in Africa, history is not just documented in court rulings or audit reports. It is remembered, preserved, and reinterpreted through art, music, film, and oral storytelling. The failure of Bukanga-Lonzo is beginning to enter this cultural space, with artists using their platforms to question authority, mourn lost opportunities, and imagine new futures. In Kinshasa, a young poet recently performed a spoken word piece titled Fields of Gold Turned Gray, capturing the disillusionment of youth betrayed by broken promises. In Lubumbashi, a community theater group has staged a play about a fictional agro-industrial project called Green Paradise that devolves into corruption and ecological disaster. On TikTok and YouTube, short animated videos dramatize the fall of the project, mixing satire with civic education. These cultural expressions are not distractions, they are essential tools of public memory, accountability, and resistance. They ensure that the lessons of Bukanga-Lonzo are not lost in bureaucratic files, but kept alive in public consciousness. Supporting these voices through grants, platforms, and public exhibitions can help cultivate a culture of vigilance and creative activism, where citizens remain engaged not just in critique, but in the reimagination of governance itself. Agriculture or exploitation, land politics and state capture in the era of food insecurity. As food insecurity deepens across Africa, exacerbated by climate change, population growth, and global economic shocks, agricultural land has become a site of both promise and peril. Governments increasingly turn to agro-industrial projects as solutions to rising food prices and unemployment. Yet, without safeguards, these ventures often become vehicles for land grabbing, elite enrichment, and foreign exploitation. In the DRC, the Bukanga-Lonzo project was promoted as a path to food sovereignty. Instead, it became a textbook case of state capture, where public institutions and assets were hijacked for private gain under the banner of national development. This same pattern has unfolded elsewhere. In Madagascar, a proposed 99-year lease of over 1 million hectares to South Korea's Daewoo Logistics was stopped by mass protests after revelations that local communities were never consulted. In Mozambique, the Pro-Savannah initiative, backed by Brazil and Japan, was suspended following grassroots resistance from farmers who faced displacement without compensation. In Kenya, major land leases to multinational agricultural firms have sparked legal battles over evictions, environmental degradation, and water rights violations. These examples reveal a recurring challenge. Agricultural development must be rooted in justice, not dispossession. Land is not just an economic asset, it is cultural heritage, social security, and political power. Projects that ignore this reality will fail, even if they are technically sound. The road forward must combine inclusive land governance, community-driven planning, and transparent project design, ensuring that agriculture serves the people, not just political or commercial elites. Lessons from Bukanga-Lonzo and the road ahead for African leaders. The fall of Bukanga-Lonzo is more than a scandal. It is a mirror held up to the face of African governance, reflecting how even the most visionary projects can collapse under the weight of corruption, exclusion, and poor planning. But within that collapse lies an opportunity, an invitation for self correction, institutional reform, and a new development ethos. Advice to African leaders: 1. Prioritize people over prestige. Grand projects must serve communities, not egos. Consult with local farmers, women's groups, youth, and traditional leaders before launching any major agricultural or infrastructure initiative. 2. Institutionalize accountability. Build legal frameworks that mandate open contracting, independent audits, and citizen participation. Punishing individuals after failure is not enough. Prevent the failure in the first place. 3. Strengthen procurement and public finance systems. Use digital platforms to track spending in real time. Implement performance-based disbursements. Require project evaluations to be made public before and after implementation. 4. Invest in local capacity trust. African engineers, agronomists, economists, and community organizers. Outsourcing every component to foreign contractors erodes sovereignty and sustainability. 5. Respect land as a human right. Adopt land reform laws that protect customary tenure, empower women, and penalize land speculation. Any agro-industrial project that displaces people without consent and compensation is doomed to fail. 6. Embrace civic voices and creative accountability. Protect journalists, artists, and whistleblowers. Encourage media and civil society to monitor and evaluate public projects. Their vigilance is not opposition, it is patriotism. Key messages: the conviction of Augustin Matata Ponyo is a pivotal moment for the DRC, but true justice requires structural reform, not scapegoating. Bukanga-Lonzo failed because of political interference, lack of oversight, and disregard for local communities, not because agro-industrial parks are inherently flawed. Africa's development challenges are not due to a lack of vision, but a failure of execution rooted in elite capture and weak institutions. Future projects must be inclusive, transparent, and participatory to avoid repeating past mistakes. Civic engagement, ethical leadership, and cross-border accountability are the foundation for sustainable development on the continent. As Africa continues to rise and redefine its path forward, the lesson of Bukanga-Lonzo must never be forgotten. It is a cautionary tale, but also a call to action for a new generation of leaders ready to serve with integrity, humility, and foresight. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where African stories are told with courage, clarity, and conviction. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay bold. If you find this analysis powerful and thought-provoking, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a voice that speaks boldly for Africa